Alfred Hitchcock once said that movies are life with the boring parts cut out. And to me, it's the boring parts that are actually interesting. The journey, the how do you get from point A to point B? What is the process? What does it look like to be a creator? This is what I find really fascinating. And so that's what this podcast is going to be about. Welcome to The Cutting Room Floor, a podcast about the creative journey, and especially the messy parts that often get left out of the highlight reels. My name is Christian Oliveira. For those of you who don't know me, I am a director and editor based in Austin, Texas. Most recently started Cedar Ranch Productions as a full-service boutique production company that I'm currently working to get off the ground in Austin. The goal for this podcast really is to check some boxes that I think are left unchecked by a lot of podcasts on film industry and creative life. We want to be real, want to be unpolished, want to be exploratory. And, the goal here is not to give you tips on how to make your screenplay or those sorts of things. Not that I might not ever cover those topics, but the idea here is really, what is the journey? What does the process look like? How do you survive as an independent creative? And this is for filmmakers and other artists alike. This isn't just geared towards film people, although that's the experience where I'm coming from. So really the idea is just exploring this life, what David Lynch kind of called the art life. So a little bit about me, so you know where I'm coming from. I've been working in the film industry now for 6 years, and it's been a very interesting 6 years, to say the least. I just turned 30 in March, and there is a lot of pressure to feel like you've figured it all out, especially when you work as a creative. You see a lot of your friends who went into the corporate world or went to med school or all these different things, right? And you see them having families or, making six-figure salaries or doing all these different things. And it seems like they've got it figured out, and you feel this pressure to figure it out too. But living the life of a creative, it's a challenge. It's not reality for a majority of us to have things figured out. And even for non-creatives, it may be on the outside they check the boxes, but on the inside, they're still figuring life out, right? So this is really kind of to open your eyes to what the path might be like as a creative. And the audience here is freelancers, multi-hyphenates, people who can't fit into one category with their art and their work. And for those of us who are figuring it out as we go. So things that I'm planning to cover through this, it's going to be a wide range of topics, and not every podcast is going to be just me. I'm planning to have a lot of guests on as well, other creatives, other artists of all kinds. But the kinds of things we plan to cover are going to be things like career pivots, identity, rejection, passion projects, financial survival, staying afloat, dry times, kind of the psychology and the mindset of being a creative, dealing with things like, imposter syndrome or, comparing yourself to others, the doubt, and then ultimately things like resilience. How do you survive? All that stuff. So that's really the goal of this podcast, is to share my experiences dealing with those things, and also to talk with others who are living this sort of creative life in a variety of different ways. My hope is to kind of have people who work in the arts full time, right, as a day job, and talk to them. And my goal is also to talk to people who are very serious about their art and their creative expression, but maybe their work is something completely different. Maybe they're a filmmaker who works as clergy, as one of my guests will be, or as an educator. Or maybe you are in the nonprofit space, or you are an accountant, or those things, right? But you still have a creative drive and a creative passion, and maybe there's work that you are putting out. And what is life like that? So I'm hoping to have a very wide range of guests on here, and I'm hoping that this will be something that can be informative for everyone who listens, especially those of you who are interested in living a creative life. So my backstory, like I said, I've worked in the film industry for about 6 years. I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in a little town called Godley, Texas. Very unremarkable place. It's not so little anymore, but still very unremarkable. I went to Baylor for my undergraduate and graduate program. I did my undergrad in 3 years, took a year off, ended up going back to Baylor for grad school, which is a story in and of itself that I can cover on another time. But shortly after I finished grad school, I got the opportunity to work for my favorite filmmaker of all time in Terrence Malick. And that is a whole other story, which I plan to cover in an episode of how I got the opportunity to work for Terry, what it was like, sitting and interacting with the man every day, all those things. But that was my first project outside of grad school. I started in November 2019. I remember driving down to Austin to move into my apartment officially on Halloween 2019. And I worked for Terry until COVID hit in 2020. In March or April, we kind of wrapped things up. My contract expired during the downtime. And from there, I have worked as a freelancer ever since. That kind of propelled me into the post-production world, and I've worked as an editor and assistant editor on projects for Netflix, independent projects. I've done web series, content, documentary stuff, corporate work, everything in between. I've even cut broadcast TV commercials, everything you could think of. I've basically done it in the last 6 years. And, now at age 30, in 2025, I still feel like I'm just beginning. And I made the decision earlier this year to kind of shift from being a freelance individual editor for hire to having my own company. I've always had kind of a entrepreneurial mindset. Both my parents were entrepreneurs, are entrepreneurs, and growing up, I watched them run a business together and, didn't realize that a majority of people's parents actually work 9-to-5 jobs that, they answer to a boss and that sort of thing. I always grew up around this kind of entrepreneurial mindset. And so that's always kind of been something that has pulled me. And then obviously the last going on 6 years now of experience, I've learned that it is very difficult to survive as just a freelancer. And when you don't have a company that you can join and work with consistently for a long period of time, and particularly in the industry now. And so, I decided to shift gears. I decided to start my own production company, and I'm still working as a freelance editor for hire right now, but I'm really focused on growing this business and this production company, doing full service production, and ultimately, employing others, providing that source of consistency and stability for others as well as myself through this business. So that's kind of where I'm at right now and where I've come from. I have faced a lot of challenges as a creative. I mean, obviously, a very big one is financial uncertainty, especially when you're a freelancer. The work, it's feast or famine a lot of the time. And admittedly, right now, I'm going through a period of famine. It is very, very difficult out there. It's summer, and this feels like the time, usually is the time when a lot of people are working and making hay while the sun shines, so to speak. But the well has kind of dried up for me in a lot of ways, and there have been some sporadic projects and things, but this has been an ongoing issue, and it creates a lot of financial uncertainty. You're like, okay, where does the money come from? And the awful thing about being 1099, contractor is that if you're not working, you can't just go file for unemployment, because in the state of Texas, at least, you don't qualify for unemployment if your income does not come from like a W-2 job, or I think that's a W-2. See, I don't even know the proper tax form. If you don't get your money from like a salaried type job where your business is paying taxes and you're contributing to unemployment tax, then you don't get to get unemployment. So it makes those famine periods extra difficult, right? So financial uncertainty, huge thing that I've faced in the last 6 years, especially with COVID and the changes to the industry regarding streaming and all sorts of things. Another challenge that I faced, and I think a lot of creatives face, is balancing your art with, making money. I mean, you have to, the challenge of this industry, and I'm speaking to film specifically here, but I think this also applies to music and, any other sort of creative arts. There is a lot of opportunity to make money, but a lot of those things that pay money are not things that feed the soul. And, as an artist, that's kind of why you get into it. I think the majority of us, at least starting out, that's our goal, is like express ourselves, express our ideas about the world, and hopefully make the world a better place through our creativity. But a lot of times you're trying to sell people things, or you're a mural artist, for example, and somebody hires you to paint a mural in their Airbnb home, but they just want you to recreate some sort of artwork that already exists. They don't want something new. They don't want something original. You're a filmmaker, and like a company hires you to come in and shoot their conference, but they don't want any sort of creative stuff, or they won't give you access to creative stuff. They just want the bare minimum coverage. They don't want to pay for the extra things that will make it like give you that real polish. And you take the job because it pays the bills. And that's a tough thing, because the more you say yes to just paying the bills, the more you say no to your own creativity. And that's a really, really difficult thing. And for a lot of people, it's very easy to lose sight of, hey, why did I get into this in the first place? Why did I choose filmmaking of all the things? Like, why am I spending my time doing this? It's easy to lose sight of it when you're just chasing some sort of financial stability. And so that's a challenge that I faced, continue to face. I've worked on some projects that I'm really, really proud of. And I've worked on some projects that, like, I hope nobody ever knows I worked on just because they paid me money. And that's the reality of it. And there's even a component of how much are you willing to compromise on your values, right? Not just your creativity, but your values. I've worked on projects that I ended up having to quit because I felt that I got into it and I realized this doesn't align with my values and my beliefs. And those things would have been steady paychecks, but I couldn't stick with it, right? Like, that is a huge challenge. So that's another challenge that I faced in the industry. And then, of course, just feeling like you're behind. I mentioned this earlier, but you got friends who are in the corporate space, and, when you hit 30, those people a lot of times are starting to work their way up. They're not just entry level anymore. They're in some sort of management position, or they're making a much better salary. And, I live in Austin, and Austin has experienced this kind of tech boom, and a lot of people are making six figures, driving around Teslas, nice cars, owning homes in a place where it's very difficult to own homes. And, you look and maybe they have kids, or they have like a nice little home with a yard, and they've got their dog, and it's all perfect, right? They work their 9 to 5. They go to their nice little, they go to Odd Duck for dinner and have a nice little evening out, and they spend the weekends hanging out at Zilker, swimming at Barton Springs. And you're like, man, I just feel like I'm so behind in my life. That is a huge, huge thing. And it can feel very isolating at times. I mean, I remember I worked a job for a company that had an office right off of Barton Springs Road, basically right downtown, right across the river from downtown Austin. And I would have, I'd be in this office for 10 hours a day, and I'd have some downtime. I'd get out and I'd go for a walk because I was just tired of being stuck inside. And I'd walk past Terry Black's barbecue, which is right there. And it would be like a Friday night. And I also worked a shift that was like 12 to 10. And so, I'd be there all day from lunch till well past dinner. And like if I go out in the evening for a walk, I'd see couples and families out on dates, like people enjoying the park across the road, like all these things. And I would just be like, oh my gosh, I want this life. I felt like Mr. Robot, like Elliot and Mr. Robot, just like looking through the window and watching all his peers, having a good time. And you're just like stuck on the outside. You can't go in. It's very hard. It's a very challenging, isolating thing you can face. Feeling like you're behind, and a lot of this pressure is self-created, or it's created from society, and you don't have to experience it, but you do nonetheless. So that is another big challenge that I have faced in the last 6 years, and I'm continuing to face. And I think these are things that every person who is a creative has dealt with or deals with on a regular basis. So why this podcast now? Why am I talking about these things now? Why are you listening to me if you've made it this far? Well, again, I'm almost 6 years past finishing graduate school. I've really been reflecting on what's worked and what hasn't. And, it kind of feels like, we're 5 years post-COVID, which happened really right after I started working and really shook up the whole industry. And we're kind of in this whole new world of entertainment and filmmaking and the arts. And I've just reflected on what worked, what hasn't, and, where I want to go from here. I've done a lot of reflecting, and I think that other people will find value in that. For me, also, this is about community. It's about, creating a safe space for other creators. I mean, when I was at school, when I was at Baylor, as an undergraduate, I was what we called a community leader. It's an RA essentially, but like at Baylor, it's more involved. It's really focused on faith and relationship building and all of these things versus like, I think, RAs at a school like UT, they're just there to like, I don't know, hand out condoms or something to the people who live on their floor. Baylor is obviously much more intentional about it. And I have always said that was probably the most fulfilling job that I've ever had. I loved that job, and I loved living, and I lived in a fine arts community as well. I loved living with fine arts people. I loved, going to lunch with somebody who lived on my floor and maybe having a difficult conversation, or maybe just having a conversation about, movies or whatever we thought was funny or interesting. Community has always been really important. And even as a grad student, again, I built relationships with other grad students, undergrads who came through my class. I have some of my best friends are people that I met as a graduate student and who came through my class or something like that. And so for me, like, this has always been about community. Community's always been very important for me. And I think that it's something that we struggle to do in the working world, and especially in the arts world. It feels so transactional. It feels so like a lot of times you work on a project and you're just there to like make sure that somebody else's vision gets made. And then when it's done, they're done with you, or, they don't even care about you during the production. And there's certainly no life lived together. There is very little engagement with other people outside of the work. And I want something different. And so I think that this, for me, this isn't just about content. This isn't just about storytelling. I think this is about life and really building a community with other creatives, and hopefully having a space for us to all gather together and to share and to learn and reflect and, ultimately live life together. Obviously, we can't be in person together with a podcast, but I'm hoping this spurs some ideas and some action that leads to those things. You know, another reason why I'm doing this now, just you hear so many creatives being like, what's next? And, or can I sustain this? I've asked the question myself. I'm like, maybe it's time to get a 9-to-5 job. Like, I just turned 30. It's not too late for me to like learn a new skill and do something else. You know, maybe it's time. And I think a lot of people ask that, especially right now, and especially in the film industry. It is a huge challenge to survive, and I think there is a path forward for myself, and I think there is a path forward for you and for everybody else who's trying to do this. But we have to explore that path together, and we need to learn from each other, and that's a big part of this podcast. So I want to create something that's of value. You know, I'm creating this podcast primarily because it's something that I wanted, and I wasn't able to find, you know, just digging through the podcasts on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I don't, you know, every film industry podcast that I found is like, here's how to work on your script or dealing with screenplays or these sorts of things, or here's, you know, how I broke through or whatever, right? It's like interviewing actors and celebrities or whatever the case may be. And there's not enough of, hey, who's the no-name creative who's like finding a way to survive, or who's doing their art in this way, or, you know, making it work as a no-name filmmaker in Austin, Texas, right? Like, there's not enough of that. So I wanted to create something of value that I would have enjoyed listening to, and hopefully I'm going to enjoy having really great conversations with other people, and you will benefit from that. That is the goal here. So with regards to format, I'm really hoping to do two things. One are solo episodes like this one that I really want to keep under 30 minutes. Really 20 minutes would be the best. And it'll be different things, stories from my life as creative, you know, tips and tricks, things I've learned, specific like case studies. Maybe I'll talk about some industry news, like that sort of thing. And then the other component will be podcasts with guests, and those will be longer. I'm trying not to put a time limit on them, although I have no intention of being a Joe Rogan or somebody like that who just talks endlessly with a guest for 3 or 4 hours. That's not helpful to anyone. But, you know, I want to have longer form conversations with other creatives and just learn about their life, learn about how they became a creative, how they're surviving, what their goals are, what they're working towards, those sorts of things. So that'll be the other format of this. My plan is to do this bi-weekly and just do it as long as I think it adds value to my life and to other people's lives. I will release these podcasts bi-weekly as an audio podcast and as a kind of a blog transcript. So you'll be able to read it as well as listen to it. And that'll live on my website. And I'll share little clips and important tidbits on social media as well. So hopefully this is going to be, you know, you can go listen to it and then you can go back and read through the show notes and find things that are of value in there. And if I mention specific resources or, you know, products or something, I'll put those in the show notes as well. So that's my goal for this podcast. And I really hope that you'll come along in this journey with me as I explore life as a creative, as I explore the stories that don't always make it when you're, you know, on stage at a film festival and talking about your success story. You know, you're never going to talk about the moments you were broke or the weeks where you were struggling to motivate yourself on your working on your screenplay, or, you know, the days where you were just like trying to find a basic job to like get the cash flowing while you waited on other ships to come to port, right? Like that is the goal here. And I really want this to be of value to people. So I hope that you will come on this journey with me, and I hope that you're as excited as I am for some of the conversations that I have coming up. So lastly, I just want to say I'm doing this because I've had projects fall apart. I've taken gigs I hated just to get by. But I've also seen the highs that come from sticking with it. I've seen what's possible when you really stick to your dream and your creative process and you follow through. So really, that's where we're at, because sometimes the best stuff ends up on the cutting room floor, and that's really where this show begins. So thank you so much for listening to this first episode, learning a little bit about me. Our next episode will be coming out in 2 weeks, and I have a very exciting interview lined up, and I hope you're ready to get going on this journey. And thank you again for listening to the Cutting Room Floor. This episode of the Cutting Room Floor is brought to you by me, Christian, and my production company, Cedar Ranch Productions. If you are a brand that would like to help sponsor a podcast such as the Cutting Room Floor, please reach out to me via the email in the show notes. Our wonderful show music was composed by Ben Hudson. This episode was mixed and edited by yours truly. Please subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you're listening, and stay tuned for our next episode.